Grace Church. Welcome to my front room. This is my message for Sunday the 22nd of March. I hope you are all doing okay. We usually begin by making sure everyone has received a warm welcome. The best we can do during this unusual season is for me to convey my appreciation for each one of you. I miss you, praying for you, and hope that it won't be too long before we can meet again in normal circumstances. Our church emphasis during this season is to encourage one another the best we can through various methods of communication. Not being able to meet up can make us feel isolated from each other. This podcast idea is to provide one opportunity to not only hear from the pastor, but also to see him. We were going to be dedicating Alex and Tess's baby daughter, Clara, this week. We cannot now do that, but I would like to begin by praying for her, as well as for all of us during this very unprecedented time. Let's just bow our heads and pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you that you are with each one of us. And today I want to particularly pray your blessing upon Clara and all of the children in Grace Church. Lord, I pray you'll come to those who feel very vulnerable and isolated at this time as well. Father, thank you that we can experience your peace even during the storms of life. And so I pray that as this message goes out, you will impart your strength and encouragement to us all in Jesus' name. Amen. In the background over here is a painting, one of my paintings of the Apostle Paul going through the Mediterranean storm in Acts chapter 27. The painting itself is vast. The sea, looking down from it from the hill, is also vast. The boat is very small. You probably won't pick it up. It's just there. Yet Paul is not disturbed by his circumstance of this storm. Rather, he is full of peace. Now, the storm actually diverted him for several months onto the island of Malta, which opened up unprecedented opportunities in Paul's apostolic mission. Baby Clara is at the beginning of her life journey. Hopefully, much of it will be straightforward for her. However, many characters in the Bible found life to be complicated, especially in terms of turning their various challenges into fruitfulness. So today I want to bring more of a reflection about being fruitful during testing times. Two of my favourite characters from the Old Testament are Abraham and Moses. Both men struggled with different types of inadequacy, and both found that to turn their inadequacy into fruitfulness was to be a process of God's grace. We all face areas of inadequacy and barrenness into our lives. It may represent an aspect of your life that you struggle with at the moment, or something you've never been fruitful in. It's important to note that barrenness isn't a sin, although the enemy can twist it to tempt you to think that it is a consequence of something you've either done or not done. The issues that you face may not directly have anything to do with you. It may be a problem that someone else has passed on to you, perhaps a parent or an upbringing issue. Abraham and Sarah were barren within the issue of human fertility. Now, which one was the barren one? Now, I know you're going to come back at me with a quick answer on that. The fact is that in the first couple of chapters of God's dealing with Abraham and Sarah, we're not told who the barren one was. Only after the first couple of chapters, the Bible tells us that Sarah was. But that could only have been made clear after Abraham's mistake, his liaison with Sarah's servant Hagar. From that relationship, Ishmael was conceived. And so it was obvious from that moment that the problem couldn't have been Abraham's problem. Up until that point, no one knew that it was Sarah's problem. In a sense, Sarah's weakness was exposed by Abraham's mistake. Although Abraham's liaison with Hagar was permitted by Sarah, it introduced into Abraham and Sarah's marriage another kind of barrenness. The sweetness and the harmony of their previous home life was suddenly wrecked and replaced with bitterness and discord. The greatest moment in Abraham's life was surely his reaction to the Lord's promise of many descendants, as mentioned in Genesis 15. And in verse 6 of Genesis 15, we are given Abraham's response. It says, Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Now that response of faith towards God's promises into their barrenness forever marked Abraham to be the father of faith. Your response of faith in God within the inadequacy of your situation is also meant to mark you out as a man or woman of faith, despite the circumstances you face. However, just a few verses after his highest point there, you see Abraham is compromising by sleeping with Hagar to try and make their barrenness go away and to artificially bring about God's promise. Abraham wrongly took responsibility for the problem they had. We always go wrong when we take responsibility for an aspect of God's grace. Now, despite Abraham's mistake, which introduced misery into his home, he still remains the father of faith. And after 25 years, their barrenness was turned around by God. The second character, Moses wanted to deliver his people from the barrenness of their Egyptian bondage. First, though, Moses had to realize that he was an impotent deliverer, unable to deliver himself, let alone a whole nation. And Moses also had a character weakness that would prove to be a lifetime problem, that of bouts of anger. Abraham also had a lifetime problem. He tended to tell fibs when he was stuck in a corner. Moses ended up murdering a man and then running away into the desert. The 40-year-old Moses ran away out of fear and inadequacy. And it was going to take another 40 years before he truly exhausted all hope of any change for either himself or for Israel. Hope for change was exhausted within his 40 years in the desert. At the age of 80, the desert process was then judged by God to be completed. And out of the blue, God turned up in the form of unquenchable fire alongside his holy voice of authority. Must have been a fearful moment at the burning bush. Yet, alongside the fear, amazingly, Moses felt compelled by the attractiveness of God's presence, and he pressed in to God. And within God's holy presence, Moses not only listened to what God said, but it seems he also had the freedom to argue and to try and say no to God. God gave him something amazing to do, but Moses argues throughout the process of getting him to see how his personal as well as the nation's barrenness could be turned into fruitfulness. It evidently wasn't enough for God to just turn up. The Lord needed to help this broken man to take hold of the authority that God now wanted him to have. Turning barrenness and inadequacy into fruitfulness is usually a process. Yes, lots of special moments to receive afresh what God has said, but then very often a process of silence and waiting. That God needed to deliver this man of impotent brokenness and make him into a man who would lead the deliverance of God's people. Abraham and Moses, they were both called by God and brought into such intimacy with God to the extent that Abraham was forever called the father of faith and Moses the friend of God. I mean, that's amazing. For both men, Abraham and Moses, their barrenness became fruitfulness through a process of encounter, and then learning to engage with God by faith within the isolated impotency of their situations. With the coronavirus pandemic, I'm sure all feel a certain amount of isolated impotency to change the situation. We are living through a process at the moment. We're not living through a moment, it's a process. But we can find God's grace for the process as well as for the moment. What Abraham received, that then needed to be fashioned within his marriage to Sarah. And what Moses received needed to be adopted into the nation of Israel. Our family backgrounds affect us all. The way we've been brought up affects us all. Therefore, new family values require a process of relearning and adopting. And relearning is a process. It's a process, firstly, of revelation. God shows us something. And we respond by believing what God is saying to us. And then we have to apply it into our circumstances, which are often barren or difficult circumstances. Now, God, who created Abraham and Moses, has also created you. And the God who changed their barrenness into fruitfulness knows how to change your barrenness, your inadequacy, into fruitfulness today. Just as creation was a process of 6 miraculous days in Genesis, and remains a process of different seasons within the life of a year, so is the transformation of your life. You may lose patience with yourself and try and fix things, making everything worse as a result. And yet God is committed to the project he has begun. And he will never let you go. So to conclude, who is the barren one? Who is the barren one? You may want it to be someone else. Maybe your partner, your parents. But the reality is we all are. Don't see your inadequacy as a stigma to be ashamed of. See it as a faith process which God is in control of. Think about those areas and issues you struggle with at the moment. Perhaps they span years and even decades of your life. God knows all about them. He has not abandoned you because of them. Now, for most of us, we like dramatic moments of change. But we're not so keen, it seems, about the processes of change. However, in the case of Abraham and Moses, those important moments of hearing God's voice were to be superseded by God's process, be that 25 or 40 years. Moments and process are both in the will and gifting of God to you. How long does it take to turn our barrenness into fruitfulness? I wish I could say. I think the answer is as long as God takes. It may be a moment, but more often it is a process. The important thing is to trust him within the process. He is in charge. He knows what he's doing, and he'll bring you through. Your name is not Abraham or Moses, yet God knows your name, and he knows your frame, and he knows where you are at this moment. I'm going to finish by playing a song that's called In the Whisper. It's by Christy Knuckles. And then we'll pray.
Day by day, I'm learning how to stay in the middle of the storm. I'm learning where to lay my head, and step by step, I'm learning how to rest in the middle of the noise. I will listen for your still small voice. So let the thunder roll, and I won't be afraid, 'cause you roll the thunder. And let the rain beat high above my roof, and I'll dance to its rhythm. And let the mighty wind blow between the oak trees as I let you steady me, 'cause you're right here in the whisper. let the thunder roll, and I won't be afraid, 'cause you roll the thunder. And let the rain beat hard above my roof, and I'll dance to its rhythm. And let the mighty wind blow between the oak trees as I let you steady me. 'Cause you're right here in the whisper, you're right here. So say peace, be still, to every beat of my heart. Say peace, be still, to every thought in my head. I know your voice, and I will listen and obey every time you call in the night. So let the thunder roll, and I won't be afraid, 'cause you roll the thunder. And let the rain beat hard upon my roof, and I'll dance to its rhythm. And let the mighty wind blow between the oak trees as I let you steady me. 'Cause you're right here in the whisper, you're right here in the whisper, you're right here in the whisper. I'm really hurt.
Let's just pray. Lord, we thank you that you know each one of us by name. We thank you that the plans you have for us are good, prosperous, to lead us into good places. And I pray, Lord, that you would quieten every heart and mind, and enable us by your grace to see you in the processes of our lives, even if they are long sometimes, as well as the moments of revelation. Thank you, Lord, that you are leading us in this particular season. And we pray that you would strengthen all of us, that even if we are somewhat isolated from each other at the moment, we're not isolated from you. And even if there's a few of us in our homes, 2 or 3 maybe, you're there with us. And those of us who are on our own, you are our Father. Your presence is always there with us, night and day. And I pray that we would know more and more of your presence in this season. So bless us, Lord, please. Bless Grace Church. Bless all the contacts we have. Use us for your glory. In Jesus' name. Amen.